Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I rise to oppose, like my Labor colleagues, this bill, and oppose it regrettably, because we simply don't need to be in this position. Electoral law should not be the subject of widespread divergence and disagreement between the parties. The convention generally is that the parties agree on what the electoral law is, because the voting public expect there to be a consensus on our voting law and on the way people participate in our democracy. But we are opposing it because of the obstinacy and arrogance of the Minister of Justice. You see, we have a deliberative process when we pass legislation in this House, and the last member who spoke may not have realised that the reason we have a first reading and a select committee consideration and a second reading and a third reading is that in every step of the way there is scrutiny and consideration of the legislation. And at any one of those steps, any member can point out that the bill does not meet the public interest test, or does not meet some other important consideration or requirement, political or otherwise. And the Labor opposition and other parties in the opposition have drawn the conclusion, having considered and studied the bill as it emerged from the Select Committee, is that it now has a provision, far from being the status quo, is now directly contrary to the status quo and is positively harmful to many voters in this country, and will be an impediment to them properly exercising their democratic rights. And that is the provision that says that there must now be verbal confirmation of a voter's details. And the only out to that, the only exception, as the Minister of Justice patronisingly said in the committee stages, is that they can flap their arms around and make a gesture. That apparently is the way you can avoid the statutory and mandatory requirement to provide verbal confirmation. It is an ugly provision and a piece of legislation that should have the support of all voters and indeed all members of this House. That's what's wrong with this provision. And members in the government, in their typical arrogant sort of way, may think that's fine. The vast majority are not affected by it, as Mr Simpson just said. The vast majority are not affected by it. Well, that is true. The vast majority don't speak English as a second language. The vast majority don't have a speech impediment. The vast majority do not have other aspects to them that make it difficult for them to fluently provide verbal confirmation. This is an unnecessary provision and a very important exercise that we undergo every 3 years. And that is why we are so opposed to it. It is totally unnecessary. Let's just recall how the original bill came about, through the typical and conventional processes of the Electoral Commission reviewing the election, of the Justice and Electoral Select Committee reviewing the election, and coming up with those improvements and those changes that are needed to ensure that the conduct of the next election is actually good and helps things run more smoothly, or at least modernises the election process. That was the genesis of the bill, as indeed most electoral amendment bills are. And then what we had was the bill that was introduced to the House and that went to the Select Committee had a comprehensive provision relating to the use of the Easy Vote card, or the enrolment confirmation card. Because prior to that, there was no statutory recognition of the Easy Vote card. It had come about through administrative provision. Oh, that's fine, that's all right, it was there. But the reality is, the Easy Vote card had demonstrated that it was, as its name suggested, and it made voting easier for a lot of people who hitherto had found it more difficult, who had hitherto found it difficult to confirm their details and go through the administrative process of collecting their ballot papers before casting their ballot. And that was why even the Electoral Commission said it was time to have statutory recognition of the Easy Vote card. It was a good mechanism. And so the Select Committee looked at it, and it was the government members who ummed and ahed and wrung their hands because they were concerned about electoral fraud. But the reality is, it's the Easy Vote card that makes electoral fraud impossible. Because once you've used it and had the page number and the line number ruled off, If you try to use it again, you're going to be caught out straight away. You'll be caught out. And all this hocus pocus from government members about fraud is just that. It is nonsense. It is nonsense. And they talk about Daljit Singh, but the reality about Daljit Singh is the system was so robust, he got picked up before anybody cast a vote. He got picked up when the ballot papers, or when the easy vote cards, have been delivered to the address. It was never going to work. It was a dumb thing to do. And he's now been called to account. He's been called to account, and he's doing his chips, as he should do. Anybody who rips off our electoral system should face the consequences, should face the music. And he has done, and that is the right thing. It has nothing to do with the easy vote card. The easy vote card is an anti-fraud measure. This government doesn't care about the fact that it has other useful aspects to it as well, which is that it makes it easier for that small portion of voters who feel intimidated by having to go through the palaver of having to provide verbal confirmation of their details. Because for some people, that is a difficult thing to do. For some people, that is a difficult thing to do. And that is why we are so opposed to it. Our job in this House, when we are considering electoral law, should be considering every conceivable way we can to make casting your vote easier. And we should be looking at means of electronic voting, but we sort of kicked that for touch as well. Well, this government, its members, have now created an impediment in our electoral law. That's the disappointing thing about it. This Parliament, under the control of this government, this National Party, will go down in history as the first to take our electoral law backwards by making it harder for people to vote. I want to conclude by making one other point, and that is this, is that this legislation was a lost opportunity when there has been so much public consensus for there to be changes and removal of the thresholds, the one-seat dog-wagging threshold, and reducing the 5% list or party vote threshold to 4%. This was the opportunity to do that. And the government disingenuously said the same Minister of Justice, who can't remember who paid for dinner, can't remember where the place was that she had dinner, 30 kilometres or 80 kilometres away from the Shanghai airport, she couldn't remember that. She couldn't remember, actually, that it was her job to go to other parties and find out whether or not there was a consensus to do this. She didn't talk to a single other party, and then she declares there is no consensus. Well, the only party disagreeing with it was her party, the National Party, because as we now have come to see, it is now on the record that it is the National Party that stands in the way of progressive developments and changes to our electoral law. It's the National Party that doesn't want to make it easier for people to vote, and it is the National Party that doesn't want to make it easy for people to choose between the parties and the individuals they want elected to Parliament. They maintain the fiction to look after their political mates, the one-party machines who jack this government up to give it the numbers it has to conduct itself in the way that it does. A shabby, grubby little government now, smeared and tainted with improper conduct by senior minister, yet one more senior minister. Never mind that they've got other ministers in their one-man band parties who have themselves fallen in disgrace. This is a shabby, grubby little government, propped up now by a continued electoral law that this House could have changed. Had we had a government that was actually interested in real leadership. We don't have that. We don't have a government that's interested in leadership. We don't have a government that cares about good quality democracy. We have a shabby little government desperate to do whatever it can to hold on to the reins of power and not give the public of this great country the right to have the people in this House who it wants, and the right for voters in this country to vote in a civilised and sensible sort of way.
I call the honourable member Holly Walker, but can I just advise if you could speak into the microphone?